Chaos must reign.
Daredevil Born Again has already captured the audience's attention, and it might be a return to a normal pace for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, with the return of Bullseye in the very first episode and the tragic death. Following that, I won't take the name and spoil it for you. It has become clear that the series is setting the tone to a much more brutal level. But fans of the comic books were aware of this development right from the moment it was announced that Muse would be the primary antagonist in the series. So before we get a chance to see the live-action Muse haunt us with his horrible actions, let's take a look at who Muse is and what his addition might mean for Daredevil. Before we go into explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means an awful lot. Thank you, and let's begin. The birth of madness, the origins of Muse. What makes a villain scarier, the action or the mysterious origin? Well, it is both, but then the mysterious origin, which was never really explained, makes it much more sinister than you can imagine. Muse is a typical example of this scenario, considering we never really knew his identity or anything else about him apart from when he launched his heinous acts, starting at Washington Heights, where Blindspot discovered his first work of art. So, nobody knows who this individual is apart from the fact that he is an artist whose art comes at a great cost: human life. First introduced in the pages of Daredevil 2016 issue 11 in the Dark Art storyline, Muse fit into the world of Matt Murdock, aka Daredevil. While most villains in this world or Marvel itself would have some motivation behind their crime, something that drives them to an end, Muse is amongst those who don't have that. That detail only helps make Muse a further mystery, as it increases the unpredictable nature of this character, leaving us confused and wondering about what he will do next and his true nature. What does he do? Muse is driven by the insatiable nature of expressing himself through art. Art that is, in other words, rather interesting. But the very means through which this art is made makes him the next big name on the list of Daredevil's arch-enemies. He makes his art using dead people, by meticulously killing them and then using their bodies to create some rather gruesome installations. No, he's not killing these individuals with a particular goal or reason. They are just tools for him to use for his artistic expression. So, if you think that he could be reasoned with via the traditional means of dealing with a serial killer, then you're taking it rather easy, one might say. First appearance: the Mural of Blood. In his first appearance from the creators Charles Soule and Ron Garney, Muse shows the chilling nature of his acts. Blindspot discovers his very first piece of art, or what we can call to be the crime scene, when Muse himself sent him the location of a warehouse in Washington Heights. What was the art piece? A mural that otherwise looked like something you might find in a museum or modern art or on some wall somewhere. This very mural was made using the blood from over 100 different missing people. Even though he won't be caught, it became clear that he only cared about the mural when he defaced it and wrote, "You're only as good as your last performance," all over it. The second art piece is when things get a bit more disturbing than the previous piece, as he mentioned the location of his next project next to the text on the mural. This time, it was located inside one of the floors of a vacant building. What was it? The corpses of 6 Inhumans who had been captured by him before were propped up as if they were performing some mundane tasks. Yes, truly macabre. Muse versus Daredevil, the battle of justice and chaos. Muse's emergence in Hell's Kitchen put him on a direct collision course with Daredevil, as both were on the opposite ends of law and order. With Muse rejecting both of these concepts, his lack of interest in justifying his work made him much more intriguing and set him apart from most other villains. However, the one thing that makes Muse equally compatible as an enemy to Daredevil is that he doesn't let his opponents have the satisfaction of victory. Like a typical artist waiting for his audience to react to his art piece, Muse was also present somewhere when the authorities discovered his second working. Matt Murdock senses this presence and leaves the scene to change into his Daredevil suit to face this new villain. On discovering him, it becomes very clear that Muse is not at all interested in the fact that he had killed the people or that he was gonna be apprehended by Daredevil, but instead he wanted a review for his artwork. Yeah, that's how chilling the first conversation between Muse and Daredevil turned out to be. When Daredevil pulled out the charges against him, he clearly stated that the people he had killed had wanted to die, and he only considered their bodies as gifts to create his artwork. In fact, when Daredevil asked him why he did it, Muse had an answer that might just be the best response from an artist dedicated to their work. He coldly stated, "I am an artist, my friend, and as an artist I hold to a strict code. Never explain and never apologize." I feel that many artists get away with this code in their bizarre art pieces, but Muse is a completely different individual in that scenario. Before Daredevil can say anything else, Muse causes a tiny explosion and manages to get away, but it turns out it was just a flashbang. Another part of his performance, even though there haven't been many interactions between Daredevil and Muse in the comics, the tiny interactions that they have had are enough to prove how chilling and important he is to be added into Daredevil's lore. Artistic terror. Muse's methods and tactics. Even though he did invite the others to come and see his gruesome acts of violence, it was only serving as an act of what an artist does, thus giving him the flair for the dramatic. For example, he was present near the scene of crime, but not for the sake of the scene of crime, like some serial killers do, but instead awaiting the response to his art. Daredevil detected that Muse wasn't even considering himself as a criminal or the activity he was responsible for as a heinous crime. Instead, he was more dedicated to his art. Later, his conversation with Daredevil turns chilling because of his indifference to the various accusations that Daredevil is trying to make. But another thing is that he loves what he does. In fact, he uses explosives that don't really cause any damage, but merely act as a distraction to escape from a particular scenario. His enthusiasm for his projects became much clearer when he first appeared publicly. He went into the court to bring the judge as a hostage into the sewers along with his other victims. While what he says might feel like ramblings on the pages of the comics, he shows his enthusiasm to his victims in the sewer by letting them know that he is thankful for their participation in his next artwork. Funnily enough, he is very much dedicated to the idea of symbolism in his art, something that an art dealer indicated when they had a chance to see his mural before he defaced it. Muse brought in 4 victims, each of whom were part of the legal system and also dedicated towards shutting down public access to his art. He also started working on the piece, but before he could do much harm, Blind Spot arrived and managed to save the victims. But as it had become clear before, Muse is no ordinary villain, as he is also skilled in fighting, so he decides to make Blind Spot his victim instead. When he got back to his workplace, where he works on his gory art, we got to witness how meticulous he is regarding his process. In fact, Daredevil managed to reach this place, and during their fight, he ended up going into a room that had the bodies of multiple individuals that he had captured hanging from the roof to get their blood. Often, his obsession with his art is what could make it a lot more difficult for himself, as it would go against him. When he was finally caught by the Inhumans who had been working with Daredevil on his investigation, Daredevil demanded justice for Blind Spot because Muse had gouged his eyes out. But instead of getting the punishment he deserved based on the law and order, Muse broke his fingers right in front of Daredevil and indicated that this would finally stop his art. The idea of doing his art is what made him strong, as he said after the first one, "I told myself I shouldn't, that it was wrong, but it didn't feel wrong. The truth is, when I'm creating, making, I'm strong. I am right." Shadows and strokes. Muse's visual identity. Muse's costume is as iconic as the costume of Daredevil and a host of his other villains, but still, there's a creepy aspect to it. Wearing suspenders on a completely white costume and some black paint on his chest, the same black could be seen from his eyes on his mask. As cool as it looks, there's no wonder that this look absolutely haunted his victims. When he was finally apprehended, they managed to take his mask off, and that's when it felt like we could question if he was inhuman or not, because he had scarred blue eye sockets and pointed teeth without any lips. It was almost as if an undead version of Christian Bale's Gore the God Butcher from Thor: Love and Thunder. superhuman or super psycho, abilities and limitations. Now, there has been a lot of discussion about whether he is just another superhuman or someone who managed to acquire these powers over time. Along with severe mental issues, when creator Charles Soule was asked if Muse is an Inhuman, he responded, "He seems like the kind of character, it's better not to explain too much." And I agree with that entirely. The mystery about his identity and other aspects might reveal too much and somewhat ruin the fear he had managed to develop. But we cannot leave without discussing the one power that he had managed to make Daredevil's abilities fail in his presence. Daredevil depends on his heightened senses that allow him to detect his enemy and their moves and put him one step ahead of them at all times. But when it came to Muse, Muse's body acted like a vortex that could absorb all sorts of sensory information that surrounded him. This is why it was difficult for vigilantes to get a hold of Muse and track him down whenever he managed to escape. Though there's no clear indication about this, the way he managed to put up murals made it quite clear that he had some sort of wall climbing skills akin to Spider-Man that allowed him to do that. After all, it won't be that surprising considering that Muse was always somewhat agile and superhuman even when it came to his fights, and he did manage to defeat both Daredevil and Blindspot. He only failed once when he underestimated Blindspot, who was fighting an inner battle, and released a burst of energy that put Muse down. But still, Muse is a brutal combatant, and his completely cold behavior toward people and others indicates that he can be quite difficult to put down even in the most basic form. The Art of Fear. It is interesting to see how the creators of Daredevil Born Again decided to make him the series' primary antagonist. Even though I am not expecting much in dealing with the character and exploring his past, there is space for bringing some interesting developments to his arc and changing the way he is introduced here. The fact that they're gonna go a lot more brutal with this latest venture, Muse seems like the finest option out there for a Daredevil villain who probably has no limits and might pave the way for a lot more gore. In fact, the creators have hinted towards the chances of some rather violent moments from the series around the end, as Justin Benson stated that one of the reasons why we're in love with the original Netflix show is its achievement in somehow making these masked vigilantes so human that you feel every drop of blood. The other tradition of the show, obviously, of the brutality is it can get gruesome. It's so important to us to show that these very human, flawed people, even the antagonists, even Wilson Fisk in season 1 of the Netflix show, when we meet him just as a guy falling in love, all of these people, the way that their pain or their ego or their sense of justice when it manifests in violence, the violence itself is grotesque. Now, there are two things happening simultaneously where, as technicians, as filmmakers, we're impressed when these practical effects get done right. And that's fun. But as storytellers, we felt really lucky that showing the grotesque was meaningful, that it was saying something, that it was saying, good guy or bad guy, this violence is wrong, and it's gross, and yet it's still entertaining. And again, as filmmakers, we've seen some practical effects on this show that we literally didn't know were possible. Now, it does make sense for Muse to be involved in the hinted violence scene, and one of the comic book storylines also hints at his involvement with the Fisk campaign. The first 2 episodes have clarified that Fisk is now the mayor, and he will start working towards removing the vigilantes from the streets of New York. The final appearance storyline for Muse is somewhat similar to that of when he escaped from prison and saw the authorities chasing down the Daredevil, something that motivated him to take matters into his own hands and start making murals across the town. Even though it has been assumed that Hunter Doohan's character might be the one for Muse, there's a chance that it might be a complete surprise yet. Doohan had a small appearance in the 2nd episode as someone who has some issues or someone who might be in trouble, so there's a chance that we might get to see a completely different angle being played for Muse. Marvelous verdict. When I first read the arc of Muse in Blindspot, it almost felt like the arc of Red Hood when Joker ended up killing Robin, and Red Hood later tried to hunt down Joker. Despite some interesting parallels, Muse didn't go for the brutal idea of killing Daredevil's sidekick. Yes, Blindspot was Daredevil's sidekick. It would be interesting to see if this is also how the series will introduce Blindspot into the arc before bringing Daredevil entirely back into the action. What do you guys think of Muse and how he will take a big part in Daredevil Born Again? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. As always, if you like the content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.